Hello, everyone, and welcome to the National Black MBA Association's Wednesdays webinar series. Thank you for joining us. Before we get started, I'd like to take a moment to acquaint you with a few features of this web event technology. At any time during today's program, you may adjust your audio using your computer volume settings. On the right-hand side of your screen, you will see a Q&A window. To submit a question, type your question in the small text box at the bottom, and when finished, click the send button. You may do this at any time during the program. All questions that you submit are only seen by today's presenter. Questions will be responded to in the order in which they were received and will be addressed at the end of the presentation. However, please note that due to time constraints, our speaker may not respond to all questions submitted. This time, I would like to introduce our speaker, Keith Milner. Throughout his corporate career, Keith's passion has been to develop people and teams through coaching. He is co-founder and principal for Coaching Catalyst. He has spent more than 15 years coaching individuals, teams, executives, and small business owners. He is adept at the art of negotiating, having successfully negotiated everything from multi-million-dollar business structures to high C-suite compensation to complex customer deals. As an executive coach, facilitator, and negotiator, Keith is able to help individuals and organizations perform better, smarter, and faster. Currently, Keith is COO and EVP for Invest Atlanta, where he is responsible for managing and directing the day-to-day operations to advance economic development. Keith's personal mission is to be an enabler, equipping people with the mental, spiritual, and physical tools they need to find their purpose and unleash new energy. Welcome, Keith.
Thank you, Gary, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope everybody's having a great day. We're going to start and go through this deck, and I will attempt to take questions as they occur, but I will also make a decision based on how we're doing on time, because I do want to get through the bulk of the presentation, and then, as Gary indicated, we'll leave some time at the end for additional questions. So the first thing that I want to start with is this quote, in business as in life, you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. And I fundamentally believe that. I think that when you consider every situation that you go through, some things we take for granted, if there is an opportunity to improve your position, it starts with just being aware and even asking. And so therefore, the whole purpose of negotiation is to improve your current situation. And sometimes negotiations can last 30 seconds, and sometimes they can last, weeks and weeks. It really all depends upon how complex the situation is and how adept at negotiation the various parties are. So for today, I have 3 learning objectives, as you can see on the screen. We'll talk about how to negotiate for personal and professional gain. I'm going to touch on the psychology of negotiation. Obviously, we won't have time to go deep into that, but it is an important consideration. And then we're going to spend most of the time talking about the negotiation process. So why is negotiation important? And I use the word competency here because I fundamentally believe negotiation is a competency. It is something that you can never really master. There's always room for improvement, and every situation is different, and people are different. But there are certain repeatable steps and repeatable skills that you can get better at if you practice them. I think you can apply these skills and this competency to any number of individuals, whether it's your colleagues at work or investors or even your relationships, even your personal relationships. So this is just a list, and I want you guys to be thinking about things that can be negotiated as I scroll through. And be thinking about other things that we put up. So my next slide is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek approach. As you can see here, we have 2 individuals, and one is obviously playing the role of a boss and another of an employee. And it is clear that the boss has done a good job of establishing a frame of reference. And we're going to talk about framing a little bit later. But as you see here, the person, the boss, has positioned what the employee, I think, and us would consider to be a modest request for a raise in a context that is somewhat unrealistic. And that is a negotiation technique. How you frame your request can directly impact how the person responds and how successful you are at moving the conversation and the negotiation to your advantage. So clearly here, establishing or a connection between a 2% raise with the whale population or peace in the Middle East certainly does not fit the opportunity. But, of course, it puts the requester on the defensive, and that is a negotiation technique. So we're going to talk a little bit about psychology at this point. And NLP in the pink box on your screen is an acronym that stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming, NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming. And NLP is a methodology. It is really designed to identify patterns of communication, both in terms of person to person, person to group, and of equal importance within your own mindset. We all have a track record. We all have a playlist that's playing in our head of things that we've learned consciously and subconsciously over the years. Sometimes there's negative self-talk. Sometimes there's positive. Oftentimes there are doubts about situations we counter, and that is running in our subconscious, but it has a material effect on what we actually say. What we think, whether we say it or not, has a material impact on what we actually say. And so the psychology of negotiation is really around, do you look at a negotiation as a win-win, meaning that this is something that I can benefit from and the other person can benefit from, and there really isn't a loser because we can both get what we want? That is one mindset to approach a negotiation from. Other people will take the mindset that, by definition, some person must win and some person must lose, meaning that there is this notion of a zero-sum game, and the whole purpose of negotiating, or the whole reason we have to negotiate, is because there are things that one person doesn't want to give up, and the other person doesn't want to give up. Or there's something that one person wants and the other person or group wants the same thing, and you can't necessarily divide it down the middle. So how you go into a negotiation from a mindset standpoint has a direct impact on the words you choose. It has a direct impact on your willingness to look at things differently. We're going to talk about the need and a strategy of putting multiple options on the table, or packaging options, if you will. It has a direct impact on how you react when you don't get your way. Are you frustrated? Or do you just see this as a learning opportunity? Do you get angry? How patient are you? Are you able to use humor to move the conversation ahead? All these things come into play when you negotiate, and it's really important that you understand yourself and understand how to read other people so that you can be in a better position to negotiate successfully. So what are some of the characteristics of a successful negotiator? So here are about 4 or 5 bullet points, and I'm not going to read them to you. They're obvious on the screen, but I just want you to take a second, and as you go down the list, think about yourself, think about situations where you have been in a negotiation posture. And did you reflect any of these characteristics? Or was the person or the group that you were negotiating with, did they reflect any of these characteristics? So this is the next slide around having a style. And this is all part of the psychology. I mean, we all have a style whether we realize it or not. The key is to identify what your style is and then be intentional about bolstering it. If you are a person who is generally upbeat and you like to engage and you like to use humor and you like to find commonalities, then that is a perfectly acceptable negotiation style. Being pleasant and being humorous is not a sign of weakness. But if that's not your natural inclination, then perhaps you want to look at something else. Other people tend to come into negotiations with more of a serious posture. And, it's not that they're frowning, but they're certainly not laughing. They're not, joking. They're not glad-hatting, patting people on the back and so on and so forth. It's all about business. Well, if that's your style and you're comfortable with that, that works as well. Some people will come in and they will, on purpose, try to put the other person or the other group on the defensive, much like the cartoon where the boss really framed the conversation around something that was really very, very ridiculous and had nothing to do with the question at hand. That's oftentimes called the Russian negotiation technique. You ask for the most ridiculous thing in the world, and then you start to negotiate down from there. And if the other person doesn't recognize what you're doing, they could very easily fall into that trap, as opposed to countering with that frame with another frame that is closer to the outcome that you ultimately want to have. But fundamentally, you need to understand your own personality. You need to understand your own psychology. You need to be very, very self-aware so that if there are little telltale signs when things start to get tense, are you a person that would clench your fist? Does your body language change? Do you blink more rapidly or more slowly? Do you perspire? I mean, these are all physical manifestations of things that are going on in your head. And just like playing poker, for those of you who know anything about playing poker, it gives the other person an indication of whether or not you are starting to become uncomfortable or you are moving off of your style. And that might be an indication that they're actually winning. So you want to be consistent with whatever style that you have, particularly as it relates to your physical manifestations, so that you don't give away anything prematurely. So there's a negotiation process, and I just framed it down to 10 steps, and we're going to walk through most of these. The number one thing is to prepare. I can't emphasize this enough, and it may seem like a common sense sort of a thing, but the more information you have, not only about what you want and what you're willing to accept, but also what the other side wants and what they're willing to accept. Historical information that you can find, via the web, via vendors, via partners, really just depends on what it is that you're negotiating. You need to get as educated as you can about that person, about that company, about that situation, and have that information at the ready, because you never really know where the negotiation is going to go, but you need to have some indication of what the other party is willing to do and not willing to do, where's the out of bounds, where are things that they are willing to concede on. And sometimes you're not going to know all of this. In fact, most of the time you're not going to know all of this. But if you have an outline in front of you, as you start to give and take, as you start to dialogue with the other person, you should be keeping notes. And you should put some testers out there just to find out where their limits of their ability to negotiate might be. We're going to talk about what the effective range is. And that's really the bargaining range in terms of where the seller's point is in terms of what they are, the least amount that they're willing to accept, and the buyer's amount, the most that they're willing to pay. So let me repeat that. The seller's range is the least amount that they're willing to pay or accept, and the buyer's most that they're willing to pay. And we're going to talk about that a little more. Negotiate at the package level. What I mean by package is you never, if at all possible, you never want to have a single issue negotiation. And a single issue negotiation basically limits where the conversation can go. It makes it a binary conversation. It's either yes, no, up, down, left, or right. You always want to have multiple things on the table because it gives you more opportunity, number one, to disguise the thing that you are most interested in. Number two, it gives you an opportunity to maybe give and concede on some things that are not as important to you, but conceding is a sign of negotiation. It's a sign of being cooperative and conciliatory, and that could help you get what you want. And then having multiple options on the table really gives the other person the same flexibility because you don't know what's really important to them, or you may not. They may not know what's really important to you. So if you guys have a multiple package negotiation on the table, it gives you just more room to maneuver. We're not going to talk about trigger strategy today because that's a bit more of a complex thing, and I really don't have time to get into it. But essentially, a trigger strategy is when the negotiations stall. The other person is shut down, or maybe you've shut down. There seems to be an impasse, you need to figure out a way or have a contingency plan for how to get the conversations going again. And then there's a whole series of things that you can do to prepare for trigger strategies. Framing and having a compelling message. The frame is really one of the most important things. And again, we're going to touch on that a little later. But the frame is how you present your ask and what you put in relation to the value of that ask. So is it a 2% raise as opposed to peace in the Middle East? Or is it a 2% raise in the context of all the accomplishments and the contributions that you've made to the organization over the past year? So that's what framing is all about. And then the last step is give to get. And this actually goes back to the notion of having package deals and making equivalent offers simultaneously. If you are able to give on some points, it does start to ingratiate you with the other person. It makes you appear as that you really want this to be a win-win situation, that you're not so stubborn or you're not so, locked in on just one thing. And that's really important. But the other part of that is that you don't want to give up things that are really valuable to you. You want to give up things that have a high perceived value to the other person and a relatively low perceived value to yourself. So this is a quote from Abraham Lincoln that I think is really spot on. And it says, as you can see, give me 6 hours to chop down a tree, and I'll spend the first 4 sharpening the axe. I love that metaphor, right? So make sure, again, when you're going into your negotiation, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to gather as many facts, whether they're, quantitative or qualitative, subjective. Talk to as many relevant people as you can, perhaps people who've gone through a similar situation. Read whatever you can find in the press. Obviously, you can do internet searches, but you really need to research the situation as much as possible and know as much as you can about the person or the entity that you're negotiating with. As I said before, you want to put multiple issues on the table for the reasons I've articulated, and you also want to have a script. As I said at the beginning, negotiating is a competency, and it's just like anything else. When you practice it, you can get better at it. But the more complex the negotiations and the longer the conversation goes, you need a way of remembering what the person said, at the beginning of the negotiation or what they said in regards to the answer to a question. Don't rely on your memory. Take notes. And then, of course, you need to be able to analyze and then make decisions on the fly. Generate issues around your goals. And what do I mean by an issue? Well, there may be things as it relates to how long is it going to take to implement. There may be things around the quality. There may be things around risk. Oftentimes people think the negotiation is all around price and cost. And oftentimes those two things are at the heart of a lot of negotiations, right? But there are oftentimes other elements that we tend to neglect. So when you're negotiating or when you're articulating your goals, you really need to think in a kind of a 360-degree manner because you never know, again, what may be really important to the other person or may be of less importance to you, all right? We've already talked about not having a single-issue negotiations and the benefits of having multiple things to trade off on. So what is the effective range? So we're going to start with your wish and then go all the way down to your BATNA, right? And then the elements in between. So your wish is the best possible outcome, right? This is when you take off your rational hat per se, and you just go with, if I were able to get X, I would be ecstatic. And you should allow yourself to not be realistic. This is really a trick with yourself to open up the possibilities, to open up the expansions. But this is something that you never share in your negotiation. This is just part of your own negotiation strategy, right? And what you're ultimately doing is creating some distance between, what would be fantastic and what would potentially be realistic and achievable. So the realistic and achievable target is your aspiration. So your wish is just, off the chart, wow, if they would double my salary, I would be happy for the rest of my life. Well, the likelihood that they're going to double your salary is probably not very good. But if you start at that point, then you'll have a better feel for, is a 2% raise really realistic, or maybe a 15% raise is realistic. If you start with the notion that, wow, I can only get a 5% raise, then you've automatically done one of the cardinal sins of negotiation, and that is you've negotiated against yourself. So you never really want to do that. Okay, so your wish is the unrealistic thing that would delight you most. Your aspiration is your realistic target. Your bottom line, this is the least you will accept as a seller or the most you will pay as a buyer. Okay, that's, you have established the floor or you've established a ceiling depending on whether or not you're the seller or the buyer. So your bargaining zone, and I talked about this earlier, or your negotiation range. Your bargaining zone is the distance between the buyer's reservation price and the seller's reservation price. The reservation price, again, for the buyer is the most that they're willing to pay. The reservation price for the seller is the least that they're willing to accept. So the distance between those two is the bargaining zone. Now, here's an important distinction. You have to take into consideration both parties. Notice I didn't say the bargaining zone was the distance between your bottom line and your aspiration. And let me back up. I'm going to go back one slide. Actually, I'm going to go back a couple of slides. So the aspiration is your point of realism. This is your target, right? Your bottom line is the least amount that you will accept. You don't want that to be your bargaining zone, the range between your aspiration and your bottom line. You do not want that to be your bargaining zone because, again, you're negotiating against yourself. What you want to be your bargaining zone is your bottom line versus their bottom line. And I hope that's clear. So let me move back to the bargaining zone. Okay, so we've covered that, the bargaining zone. And now we're going to get to probably one of the most important concepts in the whole negotiation process. And it's called the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, or BATNA for short. Best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And this is as it says. If you are not able to come to an agreement with the person or the entity that you're negotiating with, if it just breaks down and there's a stalemate, there's nothing else to be said, what are your other alternatives? You need to know that going in. And this is different than your bottom line, because you should have an alternative outside of what it is that you're negotiating for. So let me try to create an example. Let's say that you are trying to negotiate a raise, and let's say that you really want to stay with this company. You like everything. You just don't like the compensation package. And concurrently, someone has been courting you for another job, and you don't necessarily have a job offer yet, but you're pretty comfortable that if you were to turn your attentions toward this other opportunity, you could probably get hired. You may or may not know for how much, but you think it's probably for more money than what you're currently making. So you go into your boss and you say, hey, I've been doing a great job. I like it here. I really want to make a long-term future here, but I'm not happy with my compensation. I'd like a 10% raise. And your boss says, well, we can't do 10%, but we might be able to do something. And some time goes by, and the person comes back, your boss comes back with a 3% raise. And let's just say, for the sake of time, that's where it ends. So now, what's your decision? You wanted 10. That was your target, or maybe that was your aspiration. Excuse me, maybe that was your wish. You would have accepted 5. That would have been your aspiration or your target. But they came in at 3. So that is below your bottom line. Well, you got one decision is to accept the 3 and keep it moving. but your best alternative might be to resign and go take the other job. The other job has nothing to do with your negotiation with your boss. Your boss doesn't even know about the other job. And quite frankly, you're not even sure if the other job is going to give you more than a 3% raise or more than a 5% or more than a 10%. You think it's going to give you more than 3%. So it's your best alternative to what you were able to negotiate with your boss. So I hope that example explains what a BATNA is. So and this is where it gets a bit tricky, right? Because again, as I said before, the cardinal sin in negotiation is to negotiate against yourself. You really have to get outside of your own thinking, your own limitations, and this is where the research comes in, and try to understand what the BATNA is for the person that you're negotiating with. So let's talk about the boss in this situation. Maybe your boss really does not have the power to give you a 10% raise, but he really does, or she really does want to keep you. You've been a valued employee. They see great things for you in the future, and maybe their hands are tied. But at the same time, they do want to show you some love, so they come back with a 3% raise. Now, this person has to be thinking, if they are smart, well, they asked for 10. 3 is a long way from 10, but at least 3 is better than nothing. What is their BATNA? What is their best alternative? Their best alternative is that you will be happy with the 3% and you'll stay. That's maybe wishful thinking. So their BATNA may be, okay, if I lose Keith, who else can I put in his or her role? Who else can I put in Keith's role? Well, maybe there's somebody else that they have on the team that's more junior to Keith and is already making less money than Keith, and they aren't really ready to promote that person, but they think the person can do the job. So your boss may be thinking, okay, if Keith doesn't accept this 3% raise and decides to quit, then I will then promote the person below him, and I could give them a 3% raise, and I'll still come out cheaper than paying Keith because the person that they're going to promote was making less than Keith in the first place. So if you happen to think that that is your boss's BATNA, and your BATNA is to leave the company and take this other job, the range between the two, those two alternatives, is where you want to negotiate. So let's play that out a little bit. If that scenario actually played out, perhaps what you would want to think about is going back to your boss and saying, hey, 3% is not where I want it to be, and here's all the reasons why. How about this? I will take a 3% raise now, but in 6 months, I want you to agree to review my work and then put me on an accelerated compensation cycle, so at the end of 6 months, we can talk about another raise, another 3% raise. Perhaps your boss hadn't thought about that. So that would be one alternative to you actually leaving. If you also consider that the junior person doesn't have the skill sets that you have, you could talk about, well, hey, I've been doing X, Y, Z, on off the side of my desk. I would be willing to take on officially more duties and more responsibilities in consideration for a bigger raise, because I have these skills and I have these capabilities. So in that instance, not only are you giving him a greater justification for going to bat for you, you're also giving up something. You're saying, look, I'm willing to take on more work, but I want to be compensated for it. Both of those are alternatives to him actually promoting a junior person in the event that you were to leave. So again, that's just, again, another quick and dirty example of how you want to put your mind in the other person's seat to think about what they might be willing to do, and then juxtapose that to what you might be willing to do. And the difference between those 2 points gives you the range in terms of what you should be thinking about. But the net takeaway, and I can't emphasize this more, do not negotiate against yourself. Don't get into this loop in your head of, oh, they'll never consider that or they'll never do that or whatever, because you don't know. You don't know until you ask. And then when you ask, be prepared to counter. So here's a quick and dirty matrix. It's a little 2x2 matrix. On the x-axis is my BATNA, or again, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Bottom left-hand corner, my BATNA is weak. Right corner, my BATNA is strong. On the y-axis, it's your opponent or the person that you're negotiating with. Bottom left-hand corner, their BATNA is weak. Top left-hand corner, their BATNA is strong. So let's go back to the job example. If you've got a job, another job offer, but you still want to stay with the company, your BATNA is pretty strong because you can just say, okay, I resign, and then you go work for the other company. But let's say that you got school-aged children, and your kids are in a great school, and you don't want to take them out of that school. And let's say you've got a spouse, and your spouse has a great job, and the other job offer that you have would cause you to have to relocate. Well, when you put all of that together, yeah, you got another job, but now you're talking about uprooting your family, put them in new schools. Now your spouse may have to get another job. Your BATNA is not that strong. You have one, but it's not that strong. Okay? Let's go to the boss. Let's say that you have a skill set and you've got experience that no one else in your department has. So he or she really doesn't have a ready replacement for you. All they can do is try to negotiate and find some way to appease you, to give you the money that you want or give you some other perks. So they don't necessarily have a strong BATNA. In that instance, both of you are operating in the bottom left-hand corner. And that's still, that's a position of neutrality. Conversely, if the job offer that you have is a wonderful job offer and you would be excited about it, then your BATNA is pretty strong. So again, knowing what the other person's breakpoints are, just even directionally, because again, no one ever has perfect information, and I don't want to come across as if this is ever the case. But having some idea of where the other party is coming from and what they might be willing to accept or not accept is a key to you developing your negotiation strategy and having options in terms of being able to put alternative things on the table. So the next quote, the best move you can make in negotiation is to think of an incentive the other person hasn't even thought of and then meet it. So this goes to the whole notion of the first mover advantage. So some of you may have heard or may have even been taught that the first person that speaks in a negotiation has already lost, that you should always wait and react to where the other person is coming from. And that was a long-held concept in modern negotiation tactics and strategy. The newest technique and the newest philosophy is, no, you want to speak first because you want to frame the negotiation. Remember that cartoon that we started with about 30 minutes ago? You want to establish the guidelines by which you are putting your offer on the table. So if you are very skilled at framing, it does put you in an advantageous situation. The caveat is you need to have some understanding of what the range of possibility is, or you need to have some understanding of what the bargaining zone is, because you could frame yourself right out of the conversation. That would be the worst case scenario. Or you could actually not frame yourself appropriately. You may be leaving things on the table if you don't anchor yourself the right way. But normally, in the way I teach it and the way I was taught, you do want to speak first. You do want to put the first offer out there if you are informed enough to be able to do it. So why make multiple offers? The first thing is you want to signal cooperation. Again, if you only put one offer on the table, by definition, you've set up a win-lose scenario, and nobody wants to lose, okay? You want to have things that you can give away. You want to be able to concede on some things that, again, have high perceived value to the other person and low perceived value to yourself, or low real value to yourself. You want to be able to communicate a compelling message. So, again, I go back to the raise. You know, you want to be able to walk in and articulate in a clear and concise manner all the value that you've created for the company over some period of time as a justification for why you deserve a raise. You probably also want to talk about the value that you're going to create in the future. You want to set a stage where they're not thinking about just what you've done, but what you could do over the coming weeks, months, and years. And if you're able to do that, then it might make a 3 or 5% raise seem like a bargain, right? I'm talking about framing now. So when you want to make the other side maintain the status quo in terms of this is where we need to be, not where we want to go. This is where we need to be. You want to highlight the gains. And by gains, we mean this is what you're going to get, right? Most people are risk averse. They attach a value more quickly to what they could potentially lose as opposed to what they could potentially gain. That's just a mindset that a lot of people have. It's just easier for them to think about a potential worst case scenario, right? But when you want to make the person move off the status quo, you need to talk about what they're going to lose for the reason that I just said. So let me go through that again. If you want the person to stay where they are in terms of their position, not literally, but figuratively, you want to highlight the gains, right? If you want them to move off the status quo, you highlight the losses because they will more quickly anticipate or really understand, oh, my God, this is what I stand to lose if I don't do something different, okay? So let's go back again. Let's go back to the raise example. If your boss gets the impression that you are mobile and that you've got other options, then you need to talk about not what you're going to do for them in the future or not what you've done for them in the past. You need to talk about what's going to happen when you're not around. And I hope that's clear. So when you're talking about gain words, you want to use words like benefit, advantage, enhance, value, and savings. When you want to talk about loss words, you want to use words like exposure, cost, risk, or competitive threat. So what happens when you get to the end of the negotiation? Whether you've gotten what you want or they've gotten what they want or you both have gotten what you want, right? You want to be able to end the negotiation in a posture where you are at least preserving the person's thinking or their feeling that they haven't been taken advantage of. Stated differently, you want to try to leave the negotiation where they feel like the relationship has not been damaged, whatever the nature of that relationship is. And so this is a quote from Sun Tzu, The Art of War: build your opponent a golden bridge to retreat across. And when you say a golden bridge, it's like, okay, but the operative word is retreat, meaning that, guess what? You lost, I won, time for you to go home, but I'm going to let you go home gracefully. I'm going to let you go home with your dignity. I'm even going to let you go home thinking that maybe you won. Because if I give enough things that have low real value to me, but have high perceived value to you, you may walk out of the negotiation with a big smile on your face like, yeah, I got him that time. But the reality is what you got didn't really matter to me, so I'm happy, and I'm really happy with what I got. So I think I hit this too fast. So again, this is another one of my favorite cartoons. I'm not saying I want a divorce. I'm saying I want you to run for husband re-election every 4 years. So that's the importance of framing, right? She gave him an option. Now, you might say, okay, that really is just a play on words. Well, and you would be correct. It is a play on words. But now it's up to him to interpret that play. She didn't say, I want a divorce. Get out by sundown, right? That's a single issue negotiation as opposed to a multiple issue negotiation. She gave him options. So the last slide is, don't get mad, don't get even, get what you want. Everything in life is negotiable. Everything. It's a question of how prepared you are, how much information you have, how well you know what your BATNA is, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement, how well you understand the other person's BATNA, and for you to understand what your bargaining zone is. If you understand the difference between what the minimum amount that the seller is willing to accept and the maximum amount that the buyer is willing to pay, then you're going to be well suited and in a great position to be a successful negotiator. So that concludes my presentation today. So I will open it up for questions at this point. Gary, are you on the line?
Yes, Keith. Thank you very much. As a reminder, if someone would like to submit a question today, all you have to do, the Q&A window is located on the right-hand side of your screen. To submit a question, just type your question in a small text box at the bottom. When finished, click the send button or push enter. And I'll send it back to you, Keith, to handle the Q&A portion of today's program.
Okay. Okay, all right. I've got a question coming in from Jennifer. Let's see if I can open it. So the question is, how should I approach a new job in discussing salary to not throw myself out of consideration? Okay, so a couple of things. The first thing is go on Glassdoor, go on LinkedIn, go on the web. There's lots of free salary information out there or available to you. So you need to just make sure you look at the position that you are applying for and negotiating for, and you want to make sure you are looking at similar positions when you're trying to get a feel for what the salary is. Obviously, you need to take into consideration your geography. I mean, a position in Manhattan with the same skill sets, experience, and qualifications is probably going to pay a lot more than that same position in Memphis. So you need to take that into consideration. To the extent that you can go on the company's website and understand, I mean, you can go and look at their annual report, and it'll tell you most of the times, if it's a publicly traded company, what kind of raises, what kind of compensation increases they've typically given in the past. Some companies, they automatically give a 3% or 2% cost of living raise, and then on top of that, they'll do a merit or a performance increase. But you need to look for some indications of what this particular company's compensation philosophy is. Talk to people if you can. I mean, go on LinkedIn, look at the first, second, and third connections. Try to find other people that work at the company and just reach out to them and just ask them, if they would be willing to share, not anything personal about themselves, but, if they would be willing to share some general information, like in the past year, did the company pay any bonuses? Did they pay any raises? What's the history with the company? You want to get as much information as you can about the job and what the company's compensation philosophy and history has been. And then you'll be in a better position to understand what they are willing to pay. But that's just their side of the story. You need to understand where you need to be, and you need to look at your salary history. Some people will look at their salary and they say, oh, my God, I could never, let's just say you've been making $100,000 for the past 4 years, and a job comes up and you think that job might be a $130,000 type of job. You say, oh, nobody's ever going to pay me a $30,000 increase. Well, one of the things that's happening now, a lot of companies are now not even considering what your current or what your historical salary has been. I mean, a lot of companies still do, but the new wave now is for companies to value the job based on the market demand. And if you have the qualifications and skill sets that fit the position description, then they say, okay, the job pays X. I don't care what you made in the past, because perhaps you made more or maybe you made significantly less. We're just going to pay X for this job. So, again, don't negotiate against yourself. And it's always easier to come down than it is to go up. So ask for more and then let them tell you that's too much. Next question. Let's see. What are the key words for testing the limits of negotiation boundaries in salary negotiation? Okay, that's a great question. So the first thing I would say is, broaden the scope. Savvy HR people and really good, managers will not talk about salary. They'll talk about compensation. because your salary is just one component of your compensation. Particularly in this day and time, some companies have very rich medical benefits and healthcare benefits, and some companies don't. So first thing is you've got to decide what's really important to you. Is it the total compensation, or is it just the salary? Some companies have a very aggressive 401k match. Some companies don't, right? That's going to be pre-tax savings, which could be of more benefit to you or could be more value to you, right? Some companies, their vesting schedule is after the first 30 days, you're automatically vested. Some companies, you have to wait a whole year before you're vested in their retirement plan. You have to do the math on that. How much money are you leaving on the table if you have to go a whole year without a 401k match? Vacation time, sick time. Do they have a tuition reimbursement plan? Do they offer sabbaticals after X number of years? You need to broaden your scope in terms of looking at the compensation, and then you can decide if salary, just your gross take-home pay, is really the thing that you want to put the most importance on. But don't start there. Start with a broader look, because then they will give you some other things that you want to negotiate with. Let's see. Next question. What would you advise if you negotiate for a high salary at your current position, and going in you already know some of your colleagues who are in the same position have negotiated a higher rate of pay, but your boss refuses to budge? Okay. Well, that's a good question. I think you really, at this point, you have to stick to your guns and be very clear about what it is that you want. And if your boss refuses to budge, if you haven't done so already, I think you need to start thinking about other places within the company or other divisions within the company, because it sounds like it's not a question of the company's philosophy. It's that particular boss. It's that particular individual. So, my first reaction is, how do you neutralize him or her? How do you neutralize, this person having the ultimate decision? Is there some way that you can go around him and talk to his or her boss? Are you comfortable bringing this up to HR? And when I say bringing it up to HR, not in a accusatory tone or an accusatory fashion, but just simply stating your case kind of in a neutral fashion, just saying, hey, I believe that I am entitled to consideration in this range. I have reason to believe that others who have performed at a similar level of excellence have been given this level of consideration, and I'm just curious as to what I need to do to be afforded that same level of consideration. See, if you phrase it like that, you haven't thrown anybody under the bus. You haven't accused them of race or wage discrimination, and you've asked questions. You basically said, help me. I'm here. I like you here. I'm doing a great job. I'd like to stay here, but I need your help. I need you to help me to understand how I can get the same level of consideration that I think some of my peers have gotten who are also performing at a high level. So I hope that helps. Let's see. Okay, Glassdoor. All right, I think those are all the questions that I have thus far. Are there any other questions out there? We've got a little bit more time. We've got about 11 minutes. If there are other questions.
Keith, it looks like there are a few other questions. Are you seeing those?
Yeah, I just scrolled down. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. How do I negotiate a promotion when my department is downsizing and automating? Please share some ideas on this. Wow, you guys are throwing some zingers at me. Okay, so I guess the first question would be, in your role, are you able to impact efficiency or productivity gains? In your role, are you able to impact efficiency and productivity gains? because it sounds like that's one of the, or those are two of maybe the business objectives that's going on. Automation, taking people out of the equation, using processes or technology to be more efficient, and then downsizing, just frankly cutting costs, right? So in order to, I think, build a case for getting promoted, you've got to demonstrate and articulate how paying you more money is actually going to put you in a better position to save that department or that division time, effort, and expense. So, again, I'm just going to make this up. If you want a promotion that comes with a 5% raise, that 5% is going to equate to X amount of dollars, right? So your case should be, this is an investment. What you're doing, Mr. Boss or Mrs. Boss, is you're investing 5% of my salary in me, and the return on that investment is going to yield a 20% benefit to you, because in this new role, I am going to be able to reformat, streamline these business processes. I'm going to be able to find you cost savings because I'm going to go through the general ledger and cut out waste. I'm going to renegotiate all the contracts with our standard vendors. I'm going to train our procurement people on how to filter out. I mean, whatever it is that is going to specifically speak to cost savings and efficiency, you want to try to quantify what you're asking for from a promotional increase against what you're going to generate in this new role, and that would be how I would position that. Or if you think by getting promoted you can actually contribute to the downsizing because you can do two jobs in one, right? I mean, that's probably something that they're looking at. So if you think this new role, you're going to be able to, take on the work of another FTE or half of an FTE, then position that, because I mean that's a very easy thing to quantify, at least in their mind. Let's see. Do I have any tips or changes in approach that differs based on the type of product or service being purchased? Subscription renewals, software license renewals. I would say fundamentally no, but a couple of specific things to come to mind, I would say would be terms. Okay, so let's take software, right? Let's take software. Most software contracts are either, or I'm going to say software installation contracts, are the time and materials or fixed fee, right? So if it's time and materials, then you have an opportunity to put in some quality measures in there, and you have an opportunity to bake in more things around how the adoption rate goes. If you're also asking this particular vendor to train your people on the new software, and adoption and utilization is important for you, it should be, then you could put some performance triggers in there around adoption and utilization. On the renewal side, you could put in some things around your service contract, right? Usually these renewals, the service contracts are separately negotiated after the initial purchase, or at least that's been my experience. So if the service contracts, the maintenance contracts is separate on the renewal, then that's something else that you can ask for and negotiate, because that's real money, particularly if they're trying to price it as a separate thing. Nothing really comes to mind on the subscription part immediately. I'd have to noodle on that one and get back to you. Let's see. In a situation where the other party knows what you want, what are the strategies for conceding other items and or concealing the aspiration? Well, again, they may know some of what you want, but do they know all of what you want? And even if they know, or if you think they know what you want, they may not know how you weight it. Okay, so and again, I'll go back to the compensation piece. Multiple elements of compensation. If I told you that instead of giving you a $10,000 raise, I'm going to give you 2 more weeks of vacation, would you take that? Or instead of giving you a $10,000 raise, I'm going to give you a car allowance, right? Or I'm going to give you additional money for professional development. So there are things that I think you should look at and interject into the conversation to, again, have a package of things that you can trade off on. But you want to put the things in the package that you value so that would disguise, if not exactly what you want, at least it'll disguise how bad you want it relative to something else. Let's see. How can you negotiate a raise in the federal government? Well, I've just started working for a governmental entity, and I think that in this case, timing is really going to be the key. Whenever there's a change in administration, whenever there's a change in, sometimes even when there's a change in your boss, there may be an opening, but as you know, whoever submitted this question, there's not a whole lot of room for salary negotiations when everything is public, and they've got grids and they've got certain trigger points. So in that instance, I don't know. Again, that would be one where I'd have to probably go and do some additional research on. But I still stand by my opening line that everything is negotiable. We just have to be a bit more creative in some situations than in others. Let's see. Typically in negotiations in the existing company, women and women of color are often undercompensated. True. How do you feel we could manage this? Everyone is so sensitive when raising the gender and race equality. This is just my personal opinion. I would tell you to embrace it. Do not shy away from it. But also don't use it as a bully club. I mean, you can be very professional. You can be very calm. You can be very matter of fact and very objective, and still talk about the fact that in all likelihood, in this very company, there is still evidence of race and gender pay inequality. And you don't necessarily need to know the facts. Just put it out there as an assumed fact. And then you want to proceed with, now that you've put that out there, it makes them aware that you're aware, right? You then want to quickly proceed to talking about the things that you've done that are quantifiable, the things that you've done that might be a bit more subjective, the things you could do going forward, as we talked about, because they want to keep you as a valued employee. I mean, they've got time and effort invested in you. I don't know how long you've been there, but let's just assume you've been there a number of years. You've got experience that would be difficult for them perhaps to replicate easily. Maybe you've taken some training classes or professional development classes, so they've got some investment in you. You've got some investment in them. You want to position it as a win-win situation, but you also want them to be clear that you have concerns, about whether or not you're actually being, compensated fairly and equally relative to all of your peers. And again, as I said to the response to the question earlier, to the extent that you are able to talk to other people in the company in generalities about how they've been treated or about what their experience has been with raises, leveraging your contacts and your networks, or even just, go to HR and ask them to share anything that they have on, race and gender equality. A lot of companies now are tracking that stuff, particularly if the company has federal contracts. They have to keep track of their EEOC stats. They don't typically publish that stuff. They certainly don't typically, are aggressive about letting people know that they have it. But if you work for a company that's big enough that has any kind of government contracts, they have to keep track of that information. And so don't feel shy about asking for it. Let's see. I think this may be a follow-up. Let's see. Yes, I have a lot of, trying to scroll down so I can see this question. Yes, I have a lot of industry experience and educational background, as well as taking on special projects that are quantifiable. I keep those items documented for performance reviews and other discussions. Okay, great. Let's see. On July 1st, I got a 3% raise. Then open enrollment for medical, dental, vision came up. I noticed rates increased for those benefits so much that it absorbed a good portion of the 3%. How would you start the negotiation process to get my raise back? Well, I would say don't start it with anything about the benefits package, because that's already been locked and loaded. So they're not going to change that for you. I think I would start the conversation with a tactic that I mentioned earlier. I would go to your boss, explain your disappointment, and particularly focus on the timing of it, right? Like, had you known that the benefits were going to be, the cost of the benefits or your employee contribution was going to go up, you maybe would have made a different decision in terms of, what your selection process was, taking a higher deductible health plan or whatever. But the first thing I would put on the table is asking them to consider you on a more accelerated review process, just to give them, or at least put it on the table that after 6 months you want to be considered for a raise again. The other thing you need to find out is how, at least know what your budgetary cycle is. Are you operating on a calendar year or a physical year, and where are you in that cycle? I mean, because if you guys are operating on a calendar year and the budget has just been approved and you just got your raise and you just got your benefits, well, that's good news and bad news. The bad news is, okay, everything just happened at the same time. But the good news is that you can go ahead and put a stake in the ground and set an expectation that 6 months down the road you want or expect to have another conversation, and they need to, at least start planning for that contingency. Not that they will or not. If it's at the end of the year, there really isn't there may not be a whole lot of room left for them to do anything until the new budget cycle comes around. I think the other thing that you could do is really make a strong case for a change in position description and a change in responsibilities. One of the things that we haven't talked about as it relates to salary is trying to understand where you are within a salary range or a salary grid. A lot of companies use things called a Hayes system or some other compensation schema where you may be below midpoint in your range, or you may be at the top of your range. If you're below midpoint, oftentimes they will be more willing to give you a raise to bring you up to midpoint, because part of their compensation philosophy is they want everybody to be at or near midpoint. If you happen to be in a lower range but at the top of the midpoint, you're going to get redlined. And that basically means that you can't get another promotion until you are actually put into a different compensation range. So those would be two things that I would suggest. All right, guys, it's 3:03, everybody. So thank you very much. Those were great questions. I hope you guys found some of this information useful, and I look forward to continuing the dialogue with you guys. My contact information is easily available. You can contact National Black MBA, or you can reach me at 404-858-4342. 404-858-4342. Gary, I'll give it back to you.
All right. Thank you, Keith, for a great program. On behalf of Nbmbaa, I'd also like to thank you, our audience, for your participation in today's event. This concludes today's program. Again, we thank you, and have a great rest of the day.